I stared at Chris's still body, numb with shock and grief. The heart monitor's flat line echoed through the room, a cruel reminder that the man I loved was gone forever. Just then, the door burst open. Emily stormed in, her face contorted with rage. "You think you can pretend to care for me now after everything you've done?" Her accusation felt like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth to respond, but what could I say? Our relationship had been strained for years, ever since I married her father. "I'm not your real mother, and I never will be," I stated, my voice trembling. It was a harsh truth, but one we both knew deep down. Emily sneered. "Don't act so innocent. You manipulated my dad from the start, worming your way into our lives. And for what? His money?" "That's not true," I protested, though a part of me wondered if she was right. Had I been blinded by Chris's wealth and status? No, I loved him, didn't I? "Save it," Emily spat. "I'm going to make sure you don't get a single cent. You're nothing without him." Her words cut deep, reigniting every insecurity and doubt I'd harbored over the years. As she stormed out, I sank into the chair beside Chris's bed, burying my face in my hands as sobs racked my body. How had things gone so wrong? When Chris and I first met, I'd been drawn to his kindness, his warmth. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. And despite my initial reservations about dating a man with a child, I'd fallen hopelessly in love. But Emily had never accepted me. From the moment I stepped into her life, she viewed me as a threat, an intruder. No matter how hard I tried to connect with her, she shut me out, her teenage angst morphing into a cold, calculated cruelty as she grew older. And Chris, bless his soul, had been too soft on her, too eager to keep the peace. He'd enabled her behavior, siding with her against me time and again until I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. Now, with Chris gone, I was truly alone, facing the wrath of a vengeful stepdaughter who seemed determined to destroy me. As the weight of Emily's hatred bore down, I knew one thing for certain: the battle for Chris's legacy, for my very future, had only just begun. I met Chris at a company party, back when I was working in HR at a tech firm. He walked into the room, and it was like the air shifted. I couldn't take my eyes off him. His warm smile, the confident way he carried himself. When our eyes met, something sparked between us. After the party, I couldn't stop thinking about him. A few weeks later, we ran into each other at a cafe, and he asked me out. I said yes, despite the little voice in my head warning me about his complicated situation. On our first date, he was open about his past, his failed marriage, his struggle to connect with his daughter Emily after the divorce. I admired his honesty, his vulnerability. Over dinner, I found myself drawn to his values, his desire to be a better father and partner. The more time we spent together, the deeper I fell. Chris treated me with a tenderness and respect I'd rarely experienced in my years as a single woman. He made me feel cherished, special. But I couldn't ignore the shadow that loomed over our relationship, Emily. At 16, she was a sullen, resentful teenager who clearly blamed me for her parents' divorce. She refused to give me a chance, shooting me icy glares whenever I was around. Chris tried his best to make it work, to blend our lives together. We took family trips, had game nights, went out for nice dinners. But the tension was always there, simmering beneath the surface like a dark undercurrent. "She's just going through a phase," Chris would say, wrapping his arms around me. "She'll come around eventually." I wanted to believe him, but Emily's coldness only seemed to deepen with time. Our family dinners were a war zone, with her firing off snide comments and rolling her eyes whenever I spoke. Chris would shoot her warning looks, but he never truly disciplined her, too afraid of pushing her away. As the months passed, I started to see Emily's true colors. She was manipulative, playing Chris and I off against each other to get what she wanted. One week she'd give me the silent treatment, ignoring my existence. The next she'd be all smiles and charm, regaling Chris with stories of her academic achievements or volunteer work. "She's just trying to impress you," I told Chris after one particularly nauseating display. "Can't you see she's manipulating you?" But he refused to hear it, too blinded by his love for her, too desperate to have that father-daughter bond he'd always craved. Time and again he'd make excuses for her behavior, enabling it, as if his indulgence could somehow make up for the sins of the past. Looking back now, I realize I should have run, saved myself from the heartache to come. But I was in too deep, and my love for Chris wouldn't let me abandon hope. The dangerous, foolish hope that one day, somehow, Emily would accept me. Little did I know that her hatred for me ran deeper than I could have ever imagined, and that the worst was still to come. After Chris and I got married, I hoped things might improve with Emily. I was her stepmother now, an official part of the family. Surely that had to count for something. But Emily remained as distant and hostile as ever. On our honeymoon, she called Chris multiple times, always with some dramatic crisis that needed his immediate attention. When we finally returned home, exhausted, she greeted us with a look of pure disdain. "Enjoy your little vacation?" she sneered as I walked through the door. I forced a smile. "It was lovely, thanks for asking." She rolled her eyes. "Whatever, at least now you got what you wanted, a rich husband to take care of you." The words stung, but I didn't rise to the bait. After setting my bags down, I turned to leave, only to hear her mutter under her breath, "Gold digger." I whipped back around, fury rising in my chest. "You know, Emily, I'm trying my best here, but you're making it impossible." "Alicia, Emily, that's enough." Chris's voice boomed, startling us both. He stepped between us, a pained look on his face. "Can't you two get along, just this once? For me?" Emily immediately softened, her expression turning contrite. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'll try harder, I promise." She shot me a venomous glare, then brushed past us towards her room. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Chris. "I can't keep doing this. The way she treats me." "Shh." He pulled me close, stroking my hair. "Give it time. She's been through so much with the divorce. But she's a good kid deep down. She'll come around." I wanted to believe him, but months passed with no improvement. Emily remained sullen and withdrawn, alternating between ignoring me completely and making snide remarks whenever we crossed paths. Chris insisted on family dinners, saying it would help us bond. But they only seemed to make things worse. One night, over a meal of rubbery chicken and limp broccoli, Emily announced, "I got an A on my English paper. The professor said it was the best in the class." "That's wonderful, honey," Chris beamed. "I knew you could do it." He turned to me, his eyes shining with paternal pride. "Alicia, did you hear that? Isn't that great?" I forced a smile. "Yes, that's really impressive, Emily. Well done." She narrowed her eyes at me, nostrils flaring, as if my praise was deeply offensive. "It's no big deal, just something talented people can do." The barb hit its mark. I felt myself shrink under her withering gaze. Chris, ever the peacemaker, quickly changed the subject. But I could barely focus, Emily's words echoing in my mind like cruel taunts. After dinner, as I cleared the plates, Emily brushed past me with a sneer. "Thanks for doing your job, Cinderella." I sucked in a sharp breath, fighting back tears. Why was she so determined to hurt me at every turn? What had I done to deserve such venom from her? As the weeks rolled by, the isolation and anxiety took their toll. Some nights, I lay awake for hours, my mind racing with doubts. Was I the problem? Was I not trying hard enough? If only I could get through to Emily, make her see that I loved her father more than anything. But she seemed dead set on making my life a living hell. The young woman I'd hoped to form a bond with was little more than a vindictive stranger determined to shut me out. And the harder I tried to break through, the more viciously she lashed out, until one fateful day when all my worst fears would finally come to light. As Emily progressed through high school and college, her disdain for me only intensified. She became a master manipulator, using her charm and intelligence to wrap Chris around her finger whenever she wanted something. "Daddy, can I please get the new iPhone?" She'd coo, batting her long lashes. "All my friends have it, and I really need it for school projects." Chris would hesitate, looking at me uncertainly, but then Emily would pout those full lips, and he'd instantly cave. "Oh, all right, anything for my little girl." I'd try to reason with him later. "Chris, she's taking advantage of you. She doesn't need another new phone. Her old one works perfectly fine." But he'd just shake his head adamantly. "Alicia, you don't understand. I have to make up for all the years I missed when she was growing up. Just let me do this for her, okay?" And so it went, with Emily constantly working her wiles to get clothes, cars, vacations, you name it. While we lived comfortably, we certainly weren't the millionaires she seemed to think. But Chris never put his foot down, blindly indulging her every whim, no matter how outrageous or expensive. "Stop spoiling her rotten." I'd snap at him during our worst fights. You're only encouraging her entitled, manipulative behavior. Chris's brow would furrow, anger flashing in his eyes. Don't you dare talk about my daughter that way. She's been through enough. The least I can do is give her what she wants. His words sliced through me, the implication clear. Emily's needs would always come before mine. Before us. During Emily's college years, she pulled similar stunts to earn Chris's approval, regaling him with tales of her academic achievements and grand future plans, all while throwing me contemptuous glances, making it clear I'd never be a part of that brighter future she dreamed of. I got an internship at a prestigious law firm, she announced one night at dinner, chin raised defiantly as she stared me down. They said I'm on track to be a partner after I finish my degree. That's wonderful, Pumpkin, Chris gushed, looking at her with naked pride. He turned to me expectantly. Alicia, doesn't that sound impressive? I forced a tight smile. Yes, very impressive. Congratulations, Emily. She sneered at my lukewarm praise. You could at least try to act like you care about my accomplishments. The hurt must have shown on my face because Chris immediately turned on me with a glare. She's right, Alicia. You could be a bit more supportive. My cheeks burned with humiliation as his words washed over me. What did I have to do? Grovel at her feet? This pattern continued for years. Emily constantly one-upping me and rubbing her triumphs in my face, Chris fawning over her while admonishing me for not being sufficiently awed by his precious daughter's perfection. By the time Emily finished college and began working, the resentment and bitterness had driven an unbridgeable chasm in my marriage. We could barely look at each other without dredging up the emotional scars, the unhealed wounds of two parents caught in the merciless grip of divided loyalties. I love you, Alicia, but she's my little girl, Chris would say helplessly during our worst clashes, as if those words could somehow justify or excuse the hell my life had become. I understood in a way. Emily was his flesh and blood, the living embodiment of the family he'd lost through his own failings. Making it up to her, regaining her approval, it had become his singular obsession. But at what cost? By allowing her hatred and manipulation to fester unchecked, Chris had enabled a rift that may never be mendable, a rift that would soon tear our whole world asunder. Little did I know that the worst was still to come, and that Chris's death would be the spark that ignited Emily's rage into an unholy blaze of vengeance. I'll never forget the night Chris died. We were having one of our usual tense dinners, the air thick with unspoken resentments. Emily had just announced some new career triumph, basking in her father's adoring praise while shooting me smug looks from across the table. Suddenly, Chris gasped and clutched at his chest, his face drained of color. Al! Alicia! In an instant, I was by his side as he crumpled from his chair. Chris! Oh my God! Somebody call 911! Emily just stood there, eyes wide with shock, making no move to help. I shot her a pleading look as I cradled Chris's head in my lap. Emily, please, your father needs help. That seemed to snap her out of her daze. She fumbled for her phone with trembling hands and dialed emergency services. I stroked Chris's clammy forehead, murmuring desperate reassurances that everything would be okay, but his eyes had already taken on a glassy, distant look. His lips moved soundlessly as the life drained from his stricken body. The paramedics arrived and worked furiously to resuscitate him. But it was too late. Chris was gone, claimed by a massive heart attack at just 50 years old. I remember letting out a wail of anguished grief as they gently pulled me away, the love of my life now still and lifeless on the floor. Emily collapsed into a chair, face white as a sheet, looking more lost and afraid than I'd ever seen her. At the hospital, after they'd taken Chris away, Emily turned on me with undisguised fury burning in her red-rimmed eyes. You monster," she cried, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can pretend to care for me now, after everything you've done, after how you treated my dad?" I recoiled, struck by the naked hatred radiating from her slight frame. "Emily, what are you talking about? I loved your father with all my heart." "Don't give me that crap." She jabbed a finger at my chest, her whole body trembling with rage. "You manipulated him from the start, wormed your way into our lives to get your hands on his money." Tears stung my eyes as her vicious words cut deep. "That's not true at all. Chris and I—" "Save it," she spat. I'm going to make sure you don't get a single cent from him. You're nothing now that he's gone. A lump formed in my throat as the weight of her threat hit me. Oh, God, with Chris deceased, what would happen to me? To my whole life? The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and grieving relatives. Emily was cold and distant, refusing to so much as look at me. I felt like a pariah in my own life, the outsider once more. Then came the reading of the will. We gathered at the lawyer's office, Emily shooting me hateful glares from across the room. When the attorney opened the sealed documents, a hush fell over us all. To my beloved wife Alicia, the lawyer read solemnly, I leave the majority of my assets and holdings, including the house, investments, and— No! Emily screeched, leaping to her feet. All eyes turned to her as she stabbed an accusing finger at me. She manipulated him. That money is rightfully mine. I shrank in my seat, bracing for the onslaught as Emily's eruption of fury washed over me in waves. The lawyer tried to interject, but she was unstoppable, years of pent-up hatred and resentment finally unleashed. You're going to pay for this? She hissed, her chest heaving. If it's the last thing I do, I'll make you suffer for what you've done to my family. You hear me? You're going to wish you never laid eyes on us. As a deathly silence descended, I knew with sinking dread that Emily's vicious threat was just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was about to find myself in the fight of my life. Emily's meltdown at the reading of Chris's will was just the beginning of her crusade against me. In the days that followed, she launched into a relentless campaign of harassment and intimidation. That money should be mine, she'd scream whenever she saw me. You manipulated my dad into cutting me out. Her angry accusations followed me everywhere, the grocery store, the gym, even taking out the trash. She seemed determined to make my life a living hell at every turn. One afternoon, I arrived home from running errands to find her camped out on my front porch, eyes blazing with fury. There you are, you lying, gold-digging witch, she spat as I approached. Did you really think you could just take everything from me like that? I sighed warily. Emily, please. Your father wanted me taken care of after he was gone. That's all this is. Bullshit! She shot to her feet, fists clenched. I know you poisoned his mind against me over the years, turned him against his own flesh and blood. That's not true at all, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. I never tried to come between you two. Chris loved you more than anything. Emily barked a harsh laugh. Yeah, and look where that got him, dead before his time, while you swooped in like a vulture to pick over the remains. The cruel words lanced through me like daggers. I blinked back tears, suddenly regretting my fruitless attempts to reason with her. Just go, Emily, I said quietly, before one of us says something we can't take back. For a beat, her face contorted in an almost feral snarl. Then, without warning, she lunged at me, hands outstretched like talons. I gasped and stumbled back as she made a grab for my hair, her long nails raking my cheek. You evil, manipulative bitch. Instinctively, I shoved her away, sending her staggering backwards. She caught her balance, and we stared at each other, chests heaving, an unspoken line crossed. Emily's expression morphed into a vicious leer. Don't think this is over. Not by a long shot. I'm going to destroy you. Do you hear me? Destroy. You. With that, she whirled and stormed off, leaving me shaken and nursing the welt already forming on my face. Over the next few weeks, the attacks escalated from the verbal to the undeniably criminal. My car tires were slashed repeatedly. Nasty, obscene graffiti was spray-painted across my garage door. Even a brick came crashing through my front window one night, narrowly missing my head. I went to the authorities, but they could do little without catching Emily in the act. She was careful to leave no fingerprints or witnesses, her bright future as a hotshot lawyer always at the forefront of her calculated attacks. Please, you have to do something, I begged the detective assigned to my case. She's unhinged, a complete danger to herself and others. The gruff officer just shrugged, unmoved. Look, lady, I get that you're going through a tough time, but without hard evidence, there's not much we can do about a family dispute over some money. My protests fell on deaf ears. Emily had me cornered, and she knew it. The assaults just kept coming. Vile letters filled with threats and accusations, scratches along the sides of my car, and that malicious presence always lurking. I became afraid to leave my own home, jumping at every sudden noise or movement. The stress and fear were taking a heavy toll, both emotionally and physically. Some nights, I lay awake for hours, haunted by memories of Chris's warm smile and gentle touch, things I'd likely never experience again. That's when I realized with sinking dread that Emily's revenge went far deeper than mere money or inheritance. This was about stripping me of everything: my home, my safety, my very identity as Chris's wife, until I had nothing left but the torment of her hatred bearing down like a crushing weight. Something had to be done. I couldn't go on living like this, a prisoner in my own life. It was time to fight back, no matter how ugly or painful it became. Little did I know that confronting Emily's cruelty head-on would blow the lid off an even darker, more disturbing truth, and set me on a collision course from which there could be no return. I realized Emily's vendetta against me went far deeper than just jealousy or resentment over the inheritance. There was a twisted, almost pathological hatred burning within her, fueled by years of manipulation and deceit. The truth began to unravel when I was going through some old storage boxes and came across Chris's laptop from a few years back. On a whim, I booted it up and started browsing through his files, my heart aching at every photo and document reminding me of happier times. That's when I stumbled across a folder simply labeled Emily. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it and began reading through the contents: emails, text messages, even voice recordings spanning years. Evidence of Emily's ongoing lies, sabotage, and efforts to undermine my relationship with Chris. It was all there in sickening detail. Fake emergencies and crises designed to pull Chris away from me. Exaggerated stories about me mistreating or neglecting her, voiced through teary phone calls pleading for her daddy's comfort and support. Even admissions from Emily about seeing a therapist for anger issues aimed at deliberately alienating me from the family. My blood boiled as I absorbed the damning messages one by one. So many of our marital problems, the endless fights and heartache, could be traced directly back to Emily's calculated machinations over the years. The vicious, remorseless depths she had sunk to in order to maintain her vice-like grip over Chris. When I finished reading through it all, I sat in stunned silence, tears of rage streaming down my cheeks. This whole time she had been gaslighting not just me, but her own father as well, playing us both like finely tuned instruments in her twisted campaign of sociopathic jealousy. That night, when Emily came barging into my home yet again to hurl more vile accusations, I was ready. I grabbed her by the wrist as she advanced, spinning her around and slamming her against the wall. "Let go of me," she snarled, struggling against my grip. "I'll have you arrested for assault." "Shut up and listen for once," I growled through gritted teeth. "I know what you've been doing all these years, you manipulative little monster." Her eyes went wide, jaw dropping in an almost comical display of shock. What are you talking about?" Rather than explain, I released her and retrieved Chris's laptop from the other room, pulling up the file folder I'd uncovered earlier. Emily's eyes went flinty as she began scanning the documents and recordings, her mask of innocence shattering with each new revelation. "So this is how it's going to be," she spat, color rising in her cheeks. "You were always jealous of me and Dad's relationship. This is just some pathetic attempt to turn him against me, even in death." I could only stare at her in disbelief. "Are you deranged? Look at the evidence right in front of you. The lies, the sabotage. You had no problem deceiving and manipulating us to get what you wanted. Your own father," Emily sneered. "Please, he always took your side no matter what I did. Don't try pinning that on me." "You're sick," I shot back, disgust roiling in the pit of my stomach. "You've been playing the victim for years, but you're the one inflicting all this misery and destruction on this family." Her nostrils flared, lips peeling back in an ugly snarl. "This is far from over, you self-righteous bitch. In fact, it's only just beginning." She grabbed the laptop and hurled it against the far wall with a resounding crash, shattering the screen into a twisted spiderweb of shards. Then she whirled and stormed out, leaving a path of destruction in her wake. I sank to the floor, hands trembling as the full, ugly reality sank in. Whatever twisted psychological games Emily had been playing all this time, they had clearly warped her perception of reality entirely. There would be no getting through to her, no appeals to sanity or reason. I was well and truly trapped in her vengeful crusade. And as the ominous weight of her final threat hovered over me, I knew this was only the opening salvo of a war that could ultimately consume us both. After my confrontation with Emily and the chilling discovery of her years-long deception, I knew I had to take a stand once and for all. Her vindictive crusade had spiraled completely out of control. If I didn't put a stop to it immediately, there was no telling how far she might go. A few days later, I requested a meeting with Emily and laid it all on the line. We convened at a stuffy corporate office downtown, the air thick with distrust and barely concealed hostility. Emily swept in, wearing a power suit and permanent sneer, all false bravado and entitlement. Well, if it isn't the wicked stepmonster herself, to what do I owe this dubious pleasure? I squared my shoulders, mustering every ounce of resolve. Cut the act, Emily. We're done playing games here. Oh? She arched an immaculately groomed eyebrow. Is that so? Because from where I'm sitting, you're the one who needs to quit while you're behind. Jaw clenched. I slid a thick manila envelope across the table towards her. I have ironclad proof of your years of manipulation and sabotage. The lies, the fake emergencies, even admitting to therapy explicitly designed to alienate me from your father. Emily's bravado flickered for just a moment before her sneer returned full force. So you've got some circumstantial evidence, so what? That doesn't change the fact that he chose you over his own daughter in the end. Don't you get it? I shot back, anger rising. Your jealousy and entitlement drove a wedge between you two long before Chris died. He spent years enabling your behavior, indulging your every selfish whim. That struck a nerve. Emily's nostrils flared as she leaned across the table, eyes blazing. How dare you? You think you can psychoanalyze me when you're the one who wormed your way into our lives? Dad loved me more than anything until you showed up. I shook my head sadly. Emily, wake up. Your whole perception of reality has become dangerously warped. I'm not the enemy here. I'm the one trying to help you see the truth about yourself before it's too late. She opened her mouth, then seemed to think better of it, snapping it shut again, as her expression contorted in disgust. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with venom. You're right about one thing. This does end today, but not how you think. She rose abruptly from her seat, knocking it over with a clatter. I'm taking you down, one way or another. Maybe then Dad's memory can finally be at peace, free from your poisonous influence. Emily, listen to yourself, I pleaded, alarmed by the maniacal glint in her eyes. You're unraveling. Whatever delusions you've been clinging to, it's time to let go. But she was already stalking away, shoulders squared and fists clenched. Over her shoulder, she spat, Don't worry, you smug bitch. When I'm through with you, everyone will finally understand my side of things. I'll make sure of it. After she stormed out, I sat in stunned silence, emotions churning. Despite laying everything on the table, Emily was too far gone, her hatred too entrenched. There would be no reasoning with her, no bringing her back from the brink of her self-destructive obsession. In that moment, I made a difficult choice. For my own safety and sanity, I would have to cut Emily out of my life completely. She had made her bed, and now she would be forced to lie in it, dealing with the consequences of her malice and delusion. I consulted legal counsel and began the process of freezing Emily out of Chris's assets and estate. The lawyers warned it would be an uphill battle, given her unrelenting stance, but I didn't care. Even if it meant draining my own funds to the last penny, I was prepared to fight her tooth and nail. True to form, Emily came unhinged when the court orders went through, locking her out of further claiming her inheritance. She launched an all-out legal war, hiring a team of vicious attack dog attorneys committed to paint me as the villain at any cost. But I was ready this time. With Chris's true legacy, the evidence of Emily's treachery and manipulation, on my side, I weathered the vicious court battles with grim determination. Time and again, her attempts to strong-arm and bully me were thwarted by cold, hard proof. The protracted legal maelstrom bled Emily's finances dry, her shiny new career as a hotshot lawyer in jeopardy as creditors came knocking. In a cosmic twist of karma, she even faced potential disbarment as her dirty tactics and suspect actions unraveled into the harsh light. Through it all, I refused to back down or compromise. This was about more than money. It was about stripping away the twisted facade Emily had been hiding behind her whole life, forcing her to finally face the ugly reality of her own misdeeds and delusions. In the end, she brought the ruin upon herself. But I had reclaimed something infinitely more valuable than any inheritance: my self-respect, sense of justice, and the ability to move forward with Chris's loving memory intact. As the dust settled and I surveyed the wreckage Emily's hatred had wrought, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. For all the pain she'd caused, some small part of me still mourned the loss of what could have been a real bond, a sincere connection with my husband's child, a true family united through more than shared trauma and resentment. But I knew, deep down, that dream had died long ago, poisoned by Emily's all-consuming jealousy before it ever had a chance to bloom. She had made her choices repeatedly and with malice in her heart, and now she alone would have to live with the consequences. As for me, it was time to step into a new chapter, free from the shackles of the past and filled with hard-won wisdom. Though the scars would never fully heal, I carried Chris's spirit with me, determined to honor his memory by embracing life and love once more.